Welcome to Podlygamists, the Sister Wives Rewatch podcast.
We sit down each week and recap an episode of TLC's longest-running reality show, following the Browns, a Mormon polygamous family originating in Lehi, Utah.
I'm Samantha Kaiser.
And I'm Haley Graff.
And this is Podlygamists,
Season 2 bonus episode, Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey recap.
So today we're going to be discussing Keep Sweet and Pray and Obey. And if you haven't seen it on Netflix already, you can definitely watch it. Just trigger warning for that documentary and this episode. If you have any triggers of any kind, essentially, especially regarding assault, abuse of women and children, just maybe skip this one, which is about the kind of the rise and fall of the fundamentalist Mormon community in Utah to Texas, led by the Jeffs.
The horrible Jeffs.
Yeah, it's funny because I keep like thinking like how to structure this, and it's like we start with Uncle Rulon, who we actually know a little bit of background about from reading Under the Banner because there's some background provided there.
I don't remember if we talked about him in the bonus.
I don't know that we talked about it, but it was part of that. If anybody else out there read the book, also he was discussed in there. But it's funny because I keep thinking of like, oh, there's Uncle Rulon, and then it takes a turn with Warren. But it's like, no, it was still bad with Uncle Rulon. It's not like it wasn't bad. It just like by comparison,
just went from bad to worse.
It feels like not so bad, but it is still horrifying. But yeah, it's easy. They're both pieces of crap, but like you just want to be like, oh, things were going along just fine until Warren came along, but it's like, oh no, they weren't going fine.
No.
So I guess how do we even open this? Because we hear a lot of stories, a lot of led by individual testimony, and they kind of come in and come out. So I don't know. We start with
we can introduce the Wall family first, like the two daughters that are the main. So I mean, there's two women, who are being interviewed as former members of the FLDS, and they're Elisa and Rebecca, right?
Mm-hmm. Rebecca doesn't go by Wall, but because I looked her up, her last name starts with an M. But yeah, they're sisters from the same father and everything. So
yeah, their dad was a guy named Lloyd. Well, is a guy named Lloyd, who was married to his high school sweetheart named Myrna. And then he converted to the FLDS, and they basically gave him his second wife. Like, he married her upon meeting her. Her name was Sharon. And that's Rebecca's mom, and I don't know if that's also Elisa's mom.
I believe Elisa's mom is Myrna, but I'm not actually sure. I mean, it's kind of irrelevant. Like,
yeah, I mean,
we meet Lloyd, and he's only married to Myrna at the time. They interview not only these two girls, but their father Lloyd and his journey like into polygamy and through it under this like rule of the Jeffs, father and son. But it is interesting. This documentary does a good job of getting a lot of perspectives of varying levels of commitment, because it seems like Lloyd is still Mormon and like believes in the lifestyle, but he wasn't, and he probably would be still a devout person in this community if they hadn't like targeted him in the end the way they did,
right?
Lloyd. So yeah, but we kind of open, I guess, like getting to know the community of the FLDS under Rulon Jeffs, right? Like we first kind of get to know what that community looks like, what he's like as a leader. He's the prophet, I guess we should say. He's kind of seen as, he's all knowing. He's the voice of God, and they basically were, everyone in this community outside of Salt Lake City report directly to Rulon Jeffs.
And it's interesting that they did start out in Salt Lake City. So I mean, it was still, even though that they were a pretty insular part of Mormonism and everything, but they still lived in a larger community that wasn't just FLDS members. It wasn't so isolated the way it eventually did become. So you could still interact with people who are not of the same faith, going to the grocery store or anything like that. So
And it's funny because you see, because I think a lot of us are like at least on the peripheral familiar with Warren Jeffs. You hear that name and you picture this hairdo, these dresses, like very buttoned up pastel colored dresses, this crazy like tidal wave hairdo they do. But in these early days, they show a lot of home footage of like events and family get-togethers, and they're dressed like relative. They're dressed conservatively, but they're
Mhm.
wearing clothes of the time, and they don't.
Yeah.
And their hair is done like normal
For the style of
80s.
the 80s,
Yeah,
90s. Hmm.
yeah. They're wearing jeans. They're wearing colorful, cute. I mean, they're covered up, but they. One lady even says we basically got to wear whatever we wanted as long as we were pretty much being conservative, but
Yeah.
they still had quite a bit of freedom. They still listened to music and watched TV. Like they were part of society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, I mean, there was some shady shit obviously going on in their religious community, but they weren't isolated yet in a way that it became even worse down the line.
Right. Because they talk about they knew it was illegal, the polygamous lifestyle. They knew it was like looked not like well received by the public, but they still lived amongst the public. They were
Yeah.
insular, but like exposed to the world, so they weren't that careful. Like they talk about not Lloyd didn't get to sign Rebecca's birth certificate with his true name. He changed his name to like Lloyd Wilson or something and made her
Right.
name Rebecca Wilson when their last name is Wall. Like they
Hmm.
made up a fake name on the birth certificate to avoid tracing back to him having more than one wife, essentially.
Right.
So it's a weird fine line. They're like, it's almost like it's a weird fine line of where of their like kind of counterculture, but still in mainstream society to an
I
extent.
guess I would. I mean, I don't say this knowing a ton, but I would maybe liken it to sort of like Mennonites, where I
Sure.
mean, you still see like groups of Mennonites and everything going to the store, and
Mm-hmm.
like I mean, they're still out and about. You know, it's not that
Mm-hmm.
you don't see them or they're sequestered in a bunker like it
Sure.
gets to be. So I mean, I guess it's probably similar-ish to that.
That's a good. That's a good point. Yeah. Like I can't say that I'm like really like ever looked into Mennonite like home life. Just
Me neither,
like,
but it
but I
seems
see
from the
them.
outside, it seems
Yeah.
kind of similar.
Yeah. No, no, I'm just saying that's similar. Like if you had seen these communities out and about, you they stand out because they're dressed more conservatively because they're a little like quirky or whatever.
Hmm.
Big groups of people, like they have a million kids and these when they're
Right.
probably at Walmart and stuff. But you're not like looking into what's going on there. You're just like, oh yeah, these are the Mormon polygamists, sure. Just like we go out to Aldi, it's always Aldi, and you see like the van load of Amish or Mennonite people, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, yeah, they're there, but we're not like really looking into what's going on.
Yeah.
Not that I'm
No.
concerned about them the same way, but
No, not in the same way at all. But
yeah.
yeah.
And while it's like the peaceful segment of this story, it's still there's darkness, there's a lot of darkness. So
Yeah.
basically they kind of refer to women as currency or like oh there's another term they use along those lines, but they're a
Cattle.
commodity. Yeah, or cattle, yep. We'd
Mhm.
meet some like different farmers and things who have defected from the community since then, but they are interviewed and kind of describe the attitude towards women.
Yeah.
Um, and marriages are all arranged by Rulon.
Yeah.
So,
Which, there's other like cultures and stuff. I mean, I'm thinking like Indians, I think in India, like they do sometimes arranged marriages and that
mm-hmm,
kind of thing. But it's more like arranged, I believe, by their parents. Like the parents kind of broker some kind of deal with each other for their
mm-hmm,
children to marry, which
mm-hmm.
probably isn't awesome for the kids either, not getting to marry for love or whatever. But at least it's like people who do know you um, arranging
Yeah,
it. Like it's not like just this old
random.
man who's in charge of this society being like, I had this revelation, and here I'm gonna marry you off to so and they're 50 and you're 12. Like,
Yeah. Well, and it seems like when Rulon's in charge, they are at least 18, right?
it seemed
Did you
like they
notice
were.
that? They're at least of a adult, what we would consider a legal adult age to be married. Well, it's still very young, and also they're like not having a lot. They don't have any say in it.
Hmm.
They're at least not children.
Right. Right.
Um,
The fact that we're like, but at least there was in
I
this
know
really
it's
problematic,
awful.
like, yeah, I mean, this just shows you how bad it gets, I
Yes,
guess, as an
that's
indicator. I mean, for us to be like, yeah, because Rebecca, who we met, talking about her experience, she was 19 years old and Rulon had her marry him when he was 85.
Mm-hmm.
And so first, I mean,
Yeah.
she was at least not legally a child, but oh my God, that poor girl
Mm-hmm.
being 19. And like they talked about her and this other girl, Alicia, were both
Mm-hmm.
married to Rulon, and
Yep.
talking about they didn't even know marrying him anything about intimacy, sex, anything. And so that was
Where children come from. Like I think
they
one of
thought
them says
kissing was
yes.
making
Yeah.
babies.
So while they are not kids, they aren't
Educated in
educated
mhm.
or like well informed about life. So it's like they kind of
Yeah,
still have that mental like
very innocent yet. I
yeah,
mean,
innocent. Yep. And it's
so
funny, not funny, but we talked to Alicia and it's funny like getting to know these personalities of these women that we talked to in the show that they interview because Rebecca's she just comes across as very stoic and very strong and very just like matter of fact.
mhm.
Um we also meet another woman later, um
Ruby,
Ruby, yep. But her and
Alicia.
goodness, no, Alicia definitely have the demeanor and appearance of being so traumatized. Like I'm sure that Rebecca is as well, but just the way they retell, just like their like way they hold themselves and their mannerisms and stuff, they are like really reliving this trauma as they retell these stories, and it's like super hard to watch. When Alicia explains her story, she turned herself in. That's what the term they use when they're ready to get married. They turn themselves in or get turned in, whether or not it's up to them.
Mhm.
And she's always wanted to be a mom, always wanted to get married, always like just couldn't wait to turn herself in to be married, and she's the one who kind of stepped up and said I want to get placed in a marriage because that's how they go to rule on it, whether or not they are voluntarily ready to get married. They still go to rule on to get
Right.
either given to
Assigned
someone
to a man.
or yeah. And when she does that, she says to her dad I want to get married. They go to rule on. He says, well, marry me. This like crusty ass old man who's got, I think she said she's the 23rd wife at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Um,
mean, they talk about how, like, obviously that's completely nasty, anything like intimate with this old man that they're not
mhm,
attracted to or anything. But then
mhm,
also, like, they had to be kind of like his caretakers in, like,
mhm.
he was sort of incontinent and having
Yep.
issues, getting to the bathroom on time. And, like, so they'd have to clean him up. And I'm like, these are, I mean, so they're also, like, basically nurses to this
Yep.
old man as well as, like, servicing him sexually, which is just
Yeah.
horrifying. I
Mhm.
mean,
Mhm. Yeah, I really
so
don't like
just
the
these
way you said
foot
that, but yes,
soldiers.
but yeah,
Yeah, like
that just gave me a
it's just
little icky.
nasty. And like,
Yeah.
of course they're traumatized. Like
Yeah.
to be that young too and have
Yeah.
no idea anything of like anatomy really
Mhm.
beforehand, and then that's a real crash course in some
Yeah.
intimate shit. Like,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they get to talk about getting this line at the end of the evening to like give him a kiss. All the wives get in this line, and it's just like I just can't think of anything more like revolting.
gross.
I guess we kind of like meet Warren and like the kind of character he is. So one of Rulon has I didn't even list. I think they said somewhere like 63 children.
Yeah,
Rulon
I
has
think so.
63, 32 sons and like 30 daughters. And that's just according to one of the other. So we also are interviewing what's the other Jeff's
Wallace.
brothers? Yes, Wallace Jeffs, who is a defector, but he was Warren's brother and Rulon's son as well. So they had different mothers. And even now that I'm thinking about it, the fact that they had like 20 some odd wives at the time that Alicia and Rebecca marry Rulon, only 60 kids actually like seems low. But I guess he's probably not like still having a lot of kids at
I
90.
don't, I don't know if he's really probably that
Yeah.
fertile anymore at that
Yeah.
age.
That probably dropped off in like his 80s
Yeah,
or so. So
right.
yeah, that makes sense.
He's
But
going on
still,
90, so I mean,
I mean, but you think about the Browns who have four wives, and we end up with like 20 kids, you know,
so average it out like 5 kids per wife kind of deal.
versus, yeah. Anyways, so that's just something that just came to me. But we meet Wallace, who's a defector, brother of Warren, and he kind of gives us some context as to like Warren Jeffs' role in their larger family. And basically, his mother, who they call Mother Marion, Warren Jeff's mother, always kind of pushed her children in this family to be close to Rulon. It seems like kind of like a power grab, like she's going to really
Yeah.
prime her kids to take over or to have a high stance in the family and in this community because they run the community. The
The
Rulon
Jeffs.
Jeffs does. And for some reason, because Warren was born sickly, he was born 8 weeks early and almost died. She believes he was destined for greatness because he survived his like traumatic
The Lord
birth.
spared him or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I'd like to
Because
know
he
more
was
about Mother
destined to
Marion.
do greater things. Like, yeah,
Like she
I'd
had
like
a
to know what her
deal was.
psychology is. Like,
Yeah, I bet I bet it's out there, and I'm gonna have to look up that once we're done here. But
right.
yeah, they like kind of primed him to take over the
Yeah, he was
kingdom.
treated as kind of like a golden boy, like, you know,
The golden
which
boy
is
who like isn't a golden boy, you know?
he was just like this gross looking string bean kind of dude. And like I was telling you that he looks like Larry Nasser, you know, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like he's
Like
like
a
a
taller,
classic,
yeah,
yeah, he's like a classic look of like an abuser, you know,
just
but
that
he's just,
dead-eyed, yeah, look.
yeah,
He also has a voice like Kermit the Frog,
I
but
hate his voice.
just his
It
weird
it's
monotone.
cringy.
Yeah, he sings. There's a lot of the thing that's very effective about this documentary, but also so unsettling, is how much like footage they have of
Yep.
events and things like home video, like grainy 80s, 90s home video of like stuff going on around. I keep
Yeah.
wanting to say compound, but it's like just a community that's not really, they're at this time they're pretty free
Right.
as far as
Free
their
enough.
um
But yeah, they sing
a lot.
so fucking much. And and it creeps me the hell out.
These
All
weird
their
like
songs.
homemade songs. Yeah.
Like honestly, I wrote that later in the note. I mean, like far on, and I just wrote the amount of singing weirds me the fuck out of this. Like I can't with it. And
Yeah,
I'm not someone. This is probably a controversial take, but I hate the sound of children singing. I hate it. I'm sorry. No offense to the children, but I just can't stand it.
I think it's really effective as like a creepy feature in a thing, but I
Yes.
think it can be used like a good children's chorus in a song. Like Good Day, the song Good Day.
Nope. Can't even.
No.
Nope.
No, okay. Well, but it is effective as like a horror
That's
element.
all I feel.
Yeah. Yeah,
Always, no
I get
matter the
that.
context. So this was particularly cringeworthy for me.
Fair. I mean, they do have that one song that you chatted me about at work the other day that I hadn't recalled, but as I was rewatching this just now, the "My Dad is American" made song where there's like a home video of all these little girls like singing this "My dad is American made from his loving heart to his big strong arms," and like this whole I was like, this is a
Ugh, I
creepy
know. I
pedestal
was
to
just
put your
like,
dad
ew,
on.
what is this
Yeah.
song?
Mhm.
Like
So yeah,
worshiping the dad, but like I mean, in a real like
yeah.
creepy fashion.
Yeah, he's really is like, I mean, it's funny. I just was thinking about this because their beliefs of the afterlife are very like you inherit your own kingdom, you become a god of your own universe, like this kind of like imagery. That's what they describe it as. And they kind of run their own little kingdoms, each man and his family. Like he kind of does that in his like earthly existence too, where they like he becomes in this particular culture. I mean, I would say it doesn't really particularly run this way in like the Browns family, for example. But he kind of is like the lord of their little family,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean,
in
they
the
kind of talk about it, which I guess we'll discuss doing a Under the Banner of Heaven show
hmm
conversation, but they kind of just got like the priesthood holder and how they make all the
yeah.
decisions in the household, and
hmm
it's definitely antiquated um,
Yeah. Well,
and
yeah.
very
To say the
patriarchal,
least. Yeah.
obviously. But Wallace was talking about. So I mean, he's talking, having left and stuff, but he was saying how as early as like teenagers that Warren started basically kind of hitting on his sisters and being like inappropriate with them. And Wallace
Mhm.
told Rulon this, like, hey, Warren's creeping on the girls. This is weird.
Mhm.
And Rulon was just basically like, don't talk about it ever again. Don't bring it up.
Mhm.
So that's great.
And whether that was like his like discomfort factor or just like didn't really care. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
who knows? It seems it could go
Could
either
go
way,
either
really,
way, I
given the
guess.
culture. Yeah.
He's inappropriate from the beginning,
Yes.
Warren.
He has that marker
Mm-hmm.
where you kind of from early on you're watching him a little bit to for like weird behavior. And this is a
Mm-hmm.
side note, but just to like paint a picture and not to like besmirch the good name of Bob Saget, but he does resemble Danny Tanner a little bit. If we're like
He
casting,
does. Yeah, he does have a kind of
yeah,
a. It's the same time period.
yeah, yeah, I suppose. Just kind of like the gawky, kind of gangly guy look with like the fluffy brown hair. So
Where I would think looks sort of non-threatening.
till you look
Like,
into those cold dead eyes, yeah, like
well, yeah, if you if you
yeah,
if you ignore the dead behind the eyes,
yeah,
the physicality of him is
nerdy,
not, I
like
mean, he's not physically intimidating.
yeah,
Like, he's not this big muscly dude who you're afraid is going to like punch you in the face kind of. I mean, he looks very kind of weak. Like,
hmm
so you wouldn't physically, I think, be intimidated, and that's why
hmm
we'll see how he gets psychologically trying to take over younger and younger kids to control
yes.
them as
hmm
a tactic.
I had more about like Lloyd, but it's not. We don't really need to like focus. We already talked about how because he got the reason why Rebecca got married is because he like kind of like sold her off to get another wife, essentially. But
Yeah, which, okay, let's discuss that. Like,
yeah,
that's
it's hard to follow a narrative in this like discussion because it kind of bounces around a bit. But yeah, we didn't talk about how Rebecca got married because her dad had entered polygamy as like an outsider, like he converted
hmm
to the lifestyle, and he was frustrated that he was only given two wives, which really only given he had one and he got one additional
hmm
assigned to him by
so
Rulon and
given
Jeffs.
one technically then.
Yeah, right. Um, and so but they believe that they achieve the highest level in the celestial kingdom, which is like their afterlife beliefs that I still am a little baffled by, but that's besides the point.
It's a really gray area
Basically to
that I don't
become
understand.
yeah to become like the most holy, they need to have at least three wives, and he was like trying to achieve that because he really believed in this faith, this culture, religion, whatever.
hmm
Um, and but they weren't giving him more wives. So basically, it was kind of like an exchange of his daughter Rebecca for another wife. So he gave her to be married to Rulon, and then he was eventually given another wife. And we don't hear a whole lot about this third wife. Like it seems like she's kind of not in the picture.
Yeah, I
Um,
didn't hear anything. Or I don't know her
after
name,
that,
anything. Yeah,
yeah,
but I mean,
but that
how
that's
gross to
yeah.
be like, and how selfish. I mean, to be like, I personally am doing
hmm
this for my own salvation. So I'm going to sacrifice basically my daughter's freedom and happiness
hmm
so I can get another wife. Like, I
Yeah. And it's tough that
gross.
we interview him and like he's a sympathetic character. Like they interview
Yeah,
him in
you
the
don't
show.
hate him
He's like an old
watching
grandpa
him.
in his like power chair, like the chairs that
Yeah.
stand up for you, like he looks like my grandparents, and he's sitting there with his wife, and they're
Mm-hmm.
very like casual about retelling their story. They
Yeah.
don't like get into that whole sort of besides the point, but just like gives you an idea of what's going on here. They keep showing pictures, and Rebecca's like a beautiful girl, a beautiful woman as
Mm-hmm.
an adult, but they keep cutting to her as a girl, and I'm like, she for sure stood out in this like population of young girls
Mm-hmm.
as and of course Rulon decided, oh, actually I'm gonna marry you because she's like a beautiful
Very
girl.
attractive. Mm-hmm.
Um in this culture, which is just like adds to the creep factor of like you can't even pretend he was like thought he got a revelation from God to
No, he's
this
like,
is
this
his
one's
wife.
hot. I want her.
Yeah, exactly. Which is just like adds to
Because I
it.
mean, the thing is, and this is like no offense to any other girls, they look like young,
hmm
and they look still
and just
children
simple.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just like a little more plain and stuff. And there's
hmm
nothing wrong with the way they look, but
No.
like Rebecca looked maybe a little bit older for her age, and she's just very attractive. So
Just
that would stand out.
naturally, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're not wearing makeup and stuff, like
Yeah.
she just had a beautiful, like, perfect. I mean, I'm not. I feel like it sounds like I'm in love with Rebecca.
Yeah, but
She
she's
just,
a
she
very
just,
she's a very pretty
she
lady.
just
Like
stands in all the pictures of all like the 500 wives and stuff. You can always just spot
your
her.
eye
She just
goes
has,
to
like,
her.
big bright eyes and just like this beautiful sweet face, and like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it just adds to the. I mean, not that I really thought he had good intentions, but it just adds to the like creep factor of
You're
Rulon
like,
too.
wow, shocker, you picked that one, huh?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
surprising.
Not like Brenda over there,
Right?
she got
Like
passed off
the
to her
homely
buddy.
one over there, you didn't care
Yeah.
about that one, right? Like,
But yeah, anyways, that's a side note, but it just
yeah.
kind of stood out to me when every time we'd cut to her, I'm like,
It just unfortunately for her, that was a disadvantage to be that pretty.
Mm-hmm.
So.
The next, so Rulon dies. Shocker. Like, he's 1,000 years old and he
Shocker.
dies. Even though they believed he was the last prophet and he would lead them to salvation or whatever, he does die.
And I mean, they've seen people die before, right? I mean, like they've had people in their community die before. They really just think like you just are really just denying what's going to happen biologically speaking.
They just believe he's the one, which is like classic. I mean, it's classic cult. Like, you know what I mean? They're immortal. If they're gonna believe he's really the voice of God, it wouldn't be a stretch to believe that he's also immortal or gonna be the one that.
Or they thought he was like Jesus, like on the third day he rose again type of deal. I think they thought it would be something like that, like
something miraculous. But nope, he's just a human, crusty old POS who died.
Right.
And who's waiting in the wings? His crusty POS kid, Warren Jeffs. And this is
creepy
when
little shit.
This is when things go from horrifying to next level, right? Like, I can't even say bad to worse.
Because I mean, like, you told me this book because you watched it first, and you told me you're like it's pretty dark, and I was like, okay, but I mean, like, I feel like I can, it's fine. Like, I think I know what to expect. And then each episode you go through and you're like, oh, no, it didn't. No, yep, that's worse.
Like they tell you everything. It feels like, there's no like alluding to like dark stuff that happens. They tell you details.
There's no guessing there. Like, you know what happened.
Yeah. So Warren's waiting in the wings. Basically, immediately things crack down in the community, right?
You know what I found hilarious? I mean,
sure.
We'll try to find some light in this.
Yeah.
That Warren was so damn concerned about the Salt Lake City Olympics coming.
Mm-hmm. Like why? I thought about that too. Like, is it because they're gonna see?
There's more people in the community.
They're already in Salt Lake City. Like, it's not like they're not in the.
It's a big city. I mean, there are plenty of people who could see you and be like, "What are you doing over there with your creepy little group?" Yeah, but he just was like, sure, it was going to be the end of the world if the Olympics came, and that was kind of, I think, the trigger that made them move out of Salt Lake.
Yeah, it was. Because he told them all. Basically, we're getting ready for the 2002 Olympics that happened in Salt Lake City, Utah. Yeah. And Warren is got this bug up his ass that's going to be where the apocalypse begins, essentially. Like, that's where they're going to destroy first because the Olympics. And, there's no reason provided. But as I'm sitting here and we're talking about this, about what a little dweeb he was sickly. I bet he was, like, really unathletic. And he had a grudge against
these athletes
and highly skilled, superior people. You know what I mean?
You could be right on the mark with that one.
It was just like, I mean, there's not a lot of, he's got a lot of no rhyme or reason to a lot of his stupid crap he does. So I wouldn't be shocked if it was just a personal trigger. It's like, these fucking nerds, I'm gonna blah, 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 they're gonna die. Like,
right. Like, he's like that nerd kid in high school who hates all the jocks, and he's like, now the city's overrun with jocks. Mm-hmm. What are we gonna do? Like,
yep. Yeah. It just makes, maybe by a bit, he was afraid that like juxtaposition of like these powerful people right next to him would just like expose him for what a little weak little flower he
Because
is.
I mean, he's he takes over basically being the prophet or whatever,
Yep.
and essentially being God in their eyes. So I mean, if you have someone looking like Thor over here, and then you got Warren Jeffs standing next to him, I think there's no question who you're gonna want to follow.
Yeah. Or you might be like, huh, if this guy is all powerful, maybe
And
he'd
then
be
there's
like
you.
a little tougher. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Just interesting.
I feel like that had to
Um,
come into play there. It had to run through his head.
it's too random otherwise.
Yeah,
Because
because
it's
they're
not
like what the
they're
Olympics.
not like off the grid or anything where they don't get exposed to the world. Like
Yeah.
um but this is also when like the rules crack down. The dresses come into play, those pastel long dresses and the crazy ass hair. And I'm
Mm.
realizing I'm swearing a lot in this episode, so I apologize for that. But
I don't care. I'm swearing a lot too. I
the
think it's
thing
one of
that
those topics though that you just start because
losing
it
it a
just
little bit.
gets you hyped up and you're like fuck it like
Mm-hmm.
so
The thing I caught the second watch through that I didn't catch the first time was that we all picture those haircuts where they have like a huge wave, like an Elvis kind of like wave of hair, and then it kind
yeah.
of goes down to a weird long saggy braid. Like it's like
Mm-hmm.
not even like a tight braid; it's like floppy.
Yeah, like you could
Um,
move it like
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um, and they said that in like they have that weird like infomercial with the woman like no matter what shape your face is, you can make it a perfect oval with one of these hairdos. And I'm like, the goal was oval.
Yeah,
That was like the to make your face appear more of an oval.
which
That was the like beauty objective they were looking for, and I was like,
I'm not sure why.
he was
Like
had
what
an
is it about
ovally
it?
head,
Because some people like some beauty standards is like the round face, like cute round face. Like so it's just
or like
interesting.
yeah. I don't know that I've ever heard like oval described as like the desirable face shape, but I don't know. That must have been like Warren's preference
Well, we
because
didn't
that's
grow up in the FLDS, so I guess
yeah, I guess. But that must have. I mean,
that must have been his preference. Well,
big
look at
floppy
his long
braids.
ass face. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe he was just
yeah,
like, women look like this.
yeah. You. So, anyways,
Lovely.
that's they have to get there's no more videos or TV or music allowed. They really like lock everybody into a more insular existence.
Well, and Myrna, Lloyd's wife, his first wife, is saying she's like, yeah, it just became really boring
Mhm.
here. Like they just couldn't do anything, and they also use the phrase that is used in Under the Banner of Heaven quite a bit, where they anytime anyone had any questions or things didn't make sense, they were like, put it on the shelf.
Mhm.
So don't think about it. Put it on the shelf.
Um, and his tagline was basically like work hard for the pleasure of working hard. And they also mentioned that fun it was a sin word, which is like maybe the
What a great
most
life,
yeah, like really motivated to stick around here. Like I
right? I mean,
don't
like, what's the point then if we're never supposed to have any fun?
well, it really sounds like they were all striving for this afterlife. Like that was the objective or to like be to survive like the apocalypse because that's
Yeah,
when they pack up their wagons and move to Short Creek is for right before the 2002 Olympics.
yeah.
Um, and they describe that's a very it's already a community that exists of FLDS, but they basically blow up that town with people and
They like
isolate
doubled
them.
the population of the
Yeah,
town.
they're very it's more isolated and like they can have a little more privacy of their like sketchy. Yeah, I guess we do kind of transition into episode 2 or part 2 where the bomb is dropped that once they've gotten back to Short Creek and kind of cracked down, Warren also marries all of his dad's wives.
Which, and then, I mean, they're basically like saying Rulon's spirit went into Warren so he could be the prophet next. Okay, great, sure. But like, what? I mean, these women have basically kind of raised you, and you're just like
Mm.
now marrying them, and you don't find that creepy. You find nothing wrong with that. But I
I
guess he
mean,
was like hitting on his sisters, so who cares in his
yeah.
book? But
And really, like, it was just like an immediate way to really accumulate a lot of wives really quickly. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
they're all built in right there.
if the number of wives is kind of like a symbol of power, then like he already had. They somehow got to 65 because
Yeah.
when Rebecca got married to him, she was like in the 20s, And somehow in the last 5 years of his life, he accumulated 30 to 40 more wives.
Just marrying like 6 or 7 a day or whatever.
Did you follow that timeline too? I was like, how did we jump to 65?
What?
But yeah, so yeah, he's like the new prophet now, I guess, and he's inherited all these wives from his dad who were effectively his moms. If we look at that, you and I talked about like that's as if Cody dies, Cody Brown, if he dies, and Logan then marries Robin, Mary, and Christine, like
which is like unthinkable.
yeah, right. It's just to put that into context.
Yeah.
First I was like, maybe he'll just marry like the youngest, like 10. Nope, he
Right?
gets
No.
all of them. All of them who are like definitely older than him. But
Yeah. Creepy as hell. We meet then, they start having a private investigator kind of looking into the FLDS in 2004, around there.
Yep, we meet Sam Brower, the Wild West cowboy PI. Who's
He looks like he'd have like a Netflix show after, surrounding him or something.
Yep. And he gets interested in this, and this is like a kind of an interesting side like plot almost, because he reads about how the FLDS is like kicking out all these young men. They're just booted out of the community, basically because they're competition for the older men who are when accumulating all these wives. So there's like a surplus of men.
Yeah.
And they just get the boot. I don't know.
And they're just basically kind of homeless. They just take them out of society, and they don't have any independence financially or anything. And they're, mostly underage and stuff too. Like, they're just boys. Like, and they're just kicking him out because they're like, well, Warren needs to marry all the ladies, so you're kind of just superfluous, so get out.
Warren and his like buddies and like other authority figures,
other old gross dudes need to marry all these young girls that technically you should be dating and marrying, but whatever.
And then we kind of determine like it's revealed that Warren is not only like spiritually ruling this community, but he appoints every police officer, the fire department. He owns all the land in the community, all the businesses essentially, and that gives him the authority to have like undisputed rule over this community because he controls every single thing about it, including the school.
Right. They have a whole curriculum for the women, which is basically just to tell them to listen to the men.
Yeah, it's like a lot of purity based.
Just don't think. Just don't use your mind.
Yeah,
that's all they're teaching them.
They have that graphic of them like taking the X-Acto knife and just slicing sections out of science textbooks that have to do with basically the galaxy, like the
solar system.
The solar system
can't possibly learn about the planets because apparently, they have their own planet when they die. Yeah. So, it doesn't fit into our solar system.
Yeah. Unclear on like the logic of that, and then also, of course, reproduction, because heaven forbid they understand how that works.
And I was talking to my mom about this because she watched this too, and because we talked about it, and she was like, I'm so sad that for these girls, like when they were having, their wedding night with this old man, not knowing what sex was, and she's like, I know that they're closed off and they don't want to talk about it and stuff, but like their mothers should have told them though what to expect. Like, so then they weren't traumatized in the same way that the mothers were probably traumatized, not knowing what sex was, and especially with that old gross crusty dude, like, and it's not like they have the option to be like, actually I don't want to. No, like they don't, unfortunately. They have to just do it. And
I thought that same.
Like, where were their mom? It just makes me so sad. I'm like, wouldn't you care about your child to be like, this really kind of traumatizing thing that you don't know anything about is going to happen to you, because it's not going to be something that's an act of love and connection.
Even if it's not like advice or informative or anything, it's just like a heads up. Just like
FYI, kissing is not what makes babies. There's something else that goes on. Like,
just like so, yeah.
So that's just shame on that, like everybody in this.
Yeah.
And I know they're conditioned to be that way, but that just thinking of your own self, of what you experienced, like why wouldn't you want to spare your daughter from that?
Another like interesting kind of side note that Sam Brower sort of introduces us to is that not only because they control the business in town, they have like very large construction and like contracting companies, and their labor is essentially slave labor from the boys in the community.
Yeah.
And they can't they win bidding, like the bids on a lot of big jobs to do it cheaply because they don't have to pay this like forced labor they have. So companies
Yeah.
like Walmart and like these big companies, they've done a lot of work for them because it's cheap and it's essentially
Yeah.
slave labor. And he this might be, I don't know if this is like a bit of like, I don't know, being a bit dramatic or not, but he describes the FLDS as one of the biggest domestic human trafficking rings in the country.
Yeah, I found that interesting. I mean, I don't know that I would disagree given what we've learned, you know.
Given how much we just never knew, like this is new information, you know what I mean? Like it could be
Yeah.
humongous, and in addition to the fact that they're basically trafficking women as wives as
Right.
currency. So,
And then just using boys for labor.
yep,
So it's like you're just using children all over the place. Like, and I also thought it was mirroring our our current situation somewhat in the country that the men of the FLDS weren't like up in arms about women's rights being taken away or anything like that, but they were definitely mad about the guns being taken away.
their guns were confiscated, and
Like how typical.
clearly that's a matter of taking power away. That is the
That's
funny
it.
thing is this situation is what our larger country believes why they need to have their guns, so that there can't be
Mhm.
a government that overpowers them and they have what it means to fight back. In a lot of cases that's like why it's in the Constitution, right?
Right.
To be able to not have a government that can overpower you.
Right.
But in this case, dang, those guns would have been handy probably. Like
To
this
get rid
is
of your overlords who took
yeah.
so
So
it's just
it's,
it's
I
a
mean,
little ironic.
the fun, it is funny that that's like what that the guns, that's what made me mad. There's some quote from one of the dudes who they
Yeah, I
interviewed.
just wrote, well, that's fucking typical.
Yeah. But at the same time, you're like, dang that. Yeah. I mean, this in this case, this is where the logic holds up a little bit more, you know? Um, but
But God forbid we worry about those children being taken advantage of, you know.
yeah. Yeah.
As long
I
as you've
mean,
got your guns, who cares?
yeah.
Ugh.
Um, what do you have next?
Oh, so Joe and Ruby's whole story.
Yeah.
Mm,
Um,
that
Ruby
made
is
me
the
so
other
sad.
one that, yeah, I kind of alluded to about like just the visible impact that trauma is having on her as she's telling the story.
Yeah.
Um, basically, she's in love with Joe, a boy her age in the community, right? Since they were
Yeah, I
like
mean, she
small.
sees Joe in like this girl Ruby, you know, who's being interviewed and whatever. She's they weren't supposed to have crushes or anything like that, you know, because they were supposed to be assigned their spouse by Warren now. Um, but Ruby was like, of course that of course I had crushes. I'm human, you know. We all have crushes and stuff, and so she fell for this other boy her age, Joe, that she saw in worship, and they'd kind of make googly eyes at each other, and like
Hmm.
they both just really like fell for each other. It was like cute little puppy love, you know. And they're what, probably like 13, 14 maybe. They're young. I mean, might even been younger than that. I don't know, but
It seems like
they
it's like through childhood and on to their like teen
yeah, I
years.
think from there when they were really little, and
Yeah,
then like finally eventually kind of like started talking and stuff when they were maybe middle school age. Like
yeah. She talks about sneaking her brother's like Walkman and listening to ABBA and like staring at his house. Like it's real like puppy
angsty
love.
teen, like
Yeah.
just so
Um,
so head over heels for somebody and gotta listen to that music just makes you feel all the feels and like
especially when you're used to like homemade Warren Jeffs music that you sing about your dad.
used to those weird
Uh,
little
Probably
songs that they
probably really
compose.
impactful.
Yeah, I mean first off, like I like ABBA, so I mean that's good. But like
Hmm.
anything, anything would have been
Yeah.
better compared to Warren Jeff's compositions. So
Anything produced, yeah.
yeah,
Um,
anything with an instrument.
but then Ruby is called to be married. And it's not to Joe. She like kind of begs and pleads. And she tries to even run away with Joe and call him. And this story, we get Joe's side too. We interview him in this. Not we. I keep saying we. The interviewers in the show interview him, and we get his side too. And you got to have sympathy for him too. But it's hard to see what he kind of set her up for.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, basically, she was told, wasn't she told to marry her second cousin?
Yeah, who's like a jerk. Like he's like kind of not
Yeah.
like he's cruel to
And so, I
her.
mean, and what they say too, and because Ruby is, and Elisa is the same way that we've talked to, that they are a little more headstrong and independent and think for themselves. And so, of course, those girls were married as young as possible so they could be controlled more.
Mhm.
So, yeah, Ruby's married off, to, I guess we go through the whole thing of them going to that motel and getting married. Ugh, okay. So Elisa and Ruby are both set to be married at the same time. And Nevada law is not as extreme as Utah law, so they drive them to Nevada, which I guess maybe explains why the Browns headed for Las Vegas. Um, but basically, they drive Ruby and Elisa at 14 years old, each of them, very young, to this gross like roadside motel that's
Mhm.
kind of abandoned, so they could just get married in a motel room. And
Yeah.
I mean, like Elisa talks about the experience of just sobbing and like can't even say, I do when she's supposed to. And it's just, and her mom basically just kind of gripping her hand and like, it sort of felt like her mom was like, I know this sucks, but like, you just have to do it. Which again just makes me really frustrated at the parents still. If you know that this is painful and wrong, that you're still like, yep, gotta do it though. It infuriates me though.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the support of it's hard to they're just so brainwashed, so you have to like give them that, I guess, but it's hard to fathom handing off your
It's
like
hard to give them that though.
yeah. No, I agree. But
You know,
I can't imagine that they would do that in their right mind. So you have to like
I really hope not.
yeah, you have to just
But again,
give
it's
them
just, the same thing as not, telling them what to
yeah.
expect. Knowing what you went through. Don't you just want something different for your child? Don't you want better
I,
for your child? Isn't that what everybody, I mean, most people who at least wanted a child want? We always
I
want
kind
better
of
for the next generation.
I wonder though because things took such a turn. I gotta wonder if there's a big generational difference in what's happening and if they're not if they don't they
Yes
maybe
and no, I'd say. Like,
yeah, right. I mean they know what's going to happen in the broader terms, but like they didn't really experience it the same way. I don't it doesn't seem like
mhm.
um but I guess I don't know if that's true. It's funny they make this reference to like this is what we've been striving for hundreds of years. And like the Mormon nerd in me, I'm not a Mormon, but the Mormon information nerd in me is like this religion began in 1820. This hasn't been around for hundreds. It's officially been around for 200 years
Right.
as of like now. So I'm
Yeah.
like, that's not true. But
Not accurate
but
there,
like
but okay.
it's not that many generations deep, you know?
Right.
Like maximum
Really
of like
not.
5
Yeah, like think
generations.
about it. I
Like
mean, just think as far back as like our grandparents' generation. It's only like maybe
right.
what, like two more generations beyond that?
Yes.
Like
Right. That's what I'm saying.
nuts.
So that's where I'm like it's so rapidly changing this whole structure. And granted this is like a offshoot of mainstream Mormonism, but it's just interesting what how it's evolved in 200 not even
But
200 years.
and again, go back and listen to Under the Banner of Heaven episodes
Mhm.
if you want. But we did talk about how Joseph Smith himself did take some underage
Yeah, that's
brides. So
true.
this isn't exactly new,
That's
unfortunately.
true. And I guess they did talk about Warren really like idolizing the like darker parts of Joseph Smith that they don't
The
normally
blood
like
atonement, the
publicize.
violence,
Yeah.
and
Like
mhm,
mainstream doesn't focus on the blood atonement. They kind of like
yeah.
brush that
They
aside.
gloss over that, and well, I mean,
But
same like Christianity does the same thing. Like we don't talk
yeah.
about the Crusades, and so I mean, like we don't talk about that kind of thing
Yeah, I
as
mean,
much.
yeah. No, he focused on those and they talk about how the sermons kind of became darker and gloom and doom and fire
Yeah,
and brimstone after he took over.
which great,
Which
thanks.
and with the number of like they talk about every morning they had service, every like I'm sure every evening that they had a lot of service. The way it was just drilled into them like the culture of fear and like brainwashing that it just develops. Like he just really, it's a cult. This is a cult, you
Yeah.
know. I'm not comfortable saying that about Mormons as a whole, but I am comfortable saying that this
This
community
most definitely is.
is a
Let's.
huge cult. Yeah.
I think we would be remiss not to call it what it is at this point. Like,
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
we meet journalist Mike Watkiss then, who's also investigating the FLDS. And man, I said, I mean, he takes a transformation from like real clean cut guy to pretty like bushy long hair, like looks
Yeah,
kind of
like
like
a
a hippie. Like,
yeah, he's a real hippie. Um, it's a real rugged looking dude. Um, towards the end, he does transition quite a bit. The facial hair.
but yeah, I mean, he's investigating as well then as a journalist, going in trying to like interview police in Short Creek and everything, saying like, why aren't you prosecuting people for polygamy, whatever, and naturally the police who are part of the community themselves are like, well, because we believe in plural marriage. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, of course. And I mean, that's just overall problematic that anybody who would claim any kind of abuse or anything like that clearly can't go to the police in their town for it.
Yeah, it's scary. The hold they have over this all encompasses their whole life. And really quick to like backtrack for a second because we talked about them escaping to Short Creek to avoid the Olympics, like I don't know, the apocalypse that would follow the Olympics,
That
surely.
devilish Olympics. So,
And another like classic cult marker is like doomsday, right?
mm.
And then when that doesn't happen, the explanation is that for more and that you've been granted more time to become more holy. So it really like drives down that idea that they need to get even more serious about all these rules and convictions and whatever they
Yeah.
believe is going to be the path to their heaven. So yeah, just to provide a little more context as we're moving forward here.
Yeah, is another reason, I guess, in quotes, but for them getting more isolated in their
Yep.
community. The next thing I had was, so Rebecca had been married to Rulon, um, and then Warren was wanting her to remarry. Whether or not it'd be to him, I don't. They didn't really specifically say.
Mm-hmm.
But again, just at least wanting to remarry her and control her. Um,
Yep.
and this like really got to me that he was saying to her like, I'm going to teach you to be a good wife and I will break you.
Mm-hmm.
Oof, that I was like ready to burn shit.
Yeah. Yeah, she's a tough lady. I mean, her ability to recount what she's been through and like she remains pretty stoic. Um,
I hope she's had therapy.
it seems. I mean, they have to have had something to be here, to be around, to still be here.
Right.
But yeah, that was like a chilling kind of moment.
And I think kind of that maybe was part of the reason. I mean, because shortly after she does leave, they explain how very difficult it is. That physically speaking, nobody is like locking them in their homes at night.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they could get out and physically leave, but they have such ties to this community socially, obviously religiously, psychologically. I mean, they've been told that their salvation, that their afterlife depends on them staying here and being a part of this faith. So it's very manipulative from birth that they're taught these things. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
and that financially they don't have any way to just go and leave. What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to eat food? Where are you going to stay? If you're leaving. But Rebecca does leave, and I was like, damn, she's really brave. She was like, it was devastating for Elisa, her sister, for her to leave, and she really missed her family and Elisa, but absolutely needed to do it. And I'm so proud of her and impressed with her strength that she
Mm-hmm.
did.
It's one you kind of wonder why like there aren't more, or there must be all these brothers and boys who were booted out of the community who have been disillusioned by this and who want to get their families and sisters and whatever out, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, because she goes to her brother,
yeah.
who had obviously been excommunicated or whatever you want to call it. Like, but yeah, you would. I don't know. It's probably easier said than done, but you would ideally like for them to try to be getting their siblings out once they left and could kind of see the forest for the trees, you know? But
you'd think. But yeah, I'm sure it's... and I'm sure they try, and it's actually really difficult to convince them, you know?
I'm sure it is. I mean, because there's more at play than just walking out, you know?
Yeah. They believe their souls are on the line. Like, that's kind of the motivating factor. That's why Joe kind of turns in or, like, stands up. I don't know if we ever finished that story, but of Ruby.
That's about where we're at with
Yeah.
Ruby. Because Ruby decides herself, too, to leave. That she doesn't want to be with her husband anymore, and so she leaves. Yeah. And then if you want to tell about Joe, that whole story.
I don't have his whole side. I don't have it all written down, his side. It's just that they were going to meet. She calls him and says, let's leave. And he, like, stands her up, basically. Or does he even like, sell her out to report her about, like, that she's trying to... Yeah. Yeah.
Because, so Ruby initially, she's, like, barely 15, they say, you know, and she's married and whatever, but she wants to get out, and so she calls her brother, who had been outside of the community, and arranges a way to leave. And she asks Joe if he'll come with her, and he says yes, he will, but then bails at the last minute, saying, you know, he's too devoted to the faith or whatever to leave. But then, so she does leave and whatever, and she's out swimming at this, like, lake, in being, like, just living her life free. And Warren actually sent Joe after Ruby to get her to come back. And told Joe, if you get Ruby to come back, you can marry her. So Joe went to do it and tells her, like, come with me, come back, we can get married and whatever. And Joe said he kind of knew this was just a lie, but he still said it anyway and went along with it. Gets Ruby to come back to the community, and then Joe gets kicked out. And naturally, they don't get to be together. Shocker.
I gotta wonder, like, if they've reconnected on the outside and, like, if there's forgiveness. I mean,
because they were children, you know, when this happened.
And he believes he has to do this. Like, you know what I mean? It's so wrong, and it's so disturbing and so upset. It's like the ultimate betrayal. To use her, like, emotions against her to trap her back into this and lie to her. But it's also, he just believes he's serving a prophet, you know?
It's very complicated. Like, it's not so easy to just, and, like, you know, you don't hate Joe or anything for this. Like, it's not, but it's very...
When you see how the impact it's had on Ruby, it's hard to...
I know.
It's harder to have empathy, but you do. I mean, you have to. But.
And she says, you know, she had 6 kids by the age of 24. And she's like, none of those children were my choice. She's like, I love them, but I didn't choose them. And she said, I'm still very hurt and angry by my mom for allowing it. Which I don't blame her at all. But, and I mean, meanwhile, you know, Lisa, who's also a child bride herself, is married to her second cousin, who is raping her. If we're gonna... And she doesn't want to be physically intimate at all with him, but he's forcing that on her. And she doesn't have, like, the wherewithal or, like, language to know that is what is happening until later.
I don't think she really uses that word. To describe it, right?
Well, I mean, and she did go to tell Warren, like, hey, like this, I don't like what's happening in my marriage. And he was like, nope, this is just what you're supposed to deal with.
Yeah, as if he's not aware. Like, she's so naive that she thinks this is what's happening is wrong and unintentional. But it's like, that's what's meant to be happening in this way they've set this up. So I guess that kind of wraps up part 2 of Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey, and we'll pick this up in we'll have a part 2, which will consist of part 3 and 4 of the documentary going forward. And you think it's bad, but it's about to get so much worse.
Unfortunately, it is.
Yeah. So.